Okay, the closing session. I told my notes I say good afternoon here, but I think I could really say good evening. It's late in the day. I want to begin, first of all, by thanking Pierre Bungarten, who's not here, of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the head of the Washington office, and Gustav Horn of the Institute of Macroeconomics for partnering with the AFL-CIO in these two conferences. In my view, they have been, excuse me, a tremendous success. And I hope today, I think my colleague from the AFL-CIO, Damon Silvers, will join me here in saying that this is not the end. This is instead the beginning of a sustained partnership in which we engage with the important agenda that we've been engaged with today and we were engaged with last month in Washington. In the Washington conference, I emphasized the idea of a war of ideas, and that fit very well with the last session where it started talking about language. And so a very, very natural fit here. On both sides of the Atlantic, we are engaged in a war of ideas, the outcome of which will greatly influence the future, whether we will have a future of full employment and shared prosperity. And the war of ideas is present in the debate. We've already seen it over fiscal and monetary stimulus, whether they are the right response to the policy, to the crisis, or whether the right response is fiscal austerity and rejection of monetary easing. The war of ideas is also reflected in the explanations that we give for the crisis. And this is absolutely critical because how we explain the crisis will determine how we respond to it, the things that we do. So that means the war of ideas is critical here in Germany and in the US. I've already said it's already affecting the character of the monetary and fiscal response, but it will also affect the content and direction of future policy. So if you accept the neoliberal explanation of the crisis, that it is due to a combination of government failure and market failure, then the policy response should be austerity now and double down on all the neoliberal policies of the last 30 years. In their view, the crisis is because the neoliberal reforms were not pure enough, and that lack of purity prevented the market from working. However, if you accept what I call the structural Keynesian argument that the crisis is due to the neoliberal model itself, the attacking of regulation and the worsening of income distribution, then the policy response is stimulus now, combined with structural reform that reverses the neoliberal attack on workers and on social democratic government. So you get it. The bottom line is that ideas really do matter, and the outcome of this war of ideas is absolutely critical. That raises the question for me, let's talk about what we've been up to today, is where do we stand with this war of ideas in Germany and in the US? And so I'd like to take a few minutes and just take a little inventory of that. Well, in Germany, I see that opinion seems to be less divided, and I'm talking about the political establishment. And that's reflected in the current political debate and the relatively small differences between Chancellor Merkel and Social Democratic candidate Peer Steinbrück. In Germany, I do think that the microeconomic social contract about the welfare state remains largely intact. I don't see any sort of political groundswell to repeal the German welfare state. But what I do see in Germany is that the macroeconomic social contract about counter-cyclical Keynesian policy has been significantly discarded by both sides of the political system. What about in the US? Well, actually, in the US, I see that opinion is much, much more divided, and that's reflected in a rather bitter and contested politics. Now, what I see in the US is that the microeconomic social contract about the welfare state is under attack. The Republicans want to destroy it completely, and a small but powerful group of Democrats want to shrink it. However, the macroeconomic social contract about Keynesian countercyclical policy is still in place. Democrats are reasonably strong supporters, and so too are Republicans. That may surprise you, but don't be fooled by Republican rhetoric. If they were in power, they would use plutocratic countercyclical policy. Their current opposition to stimulus is because they oppose egalitarian countercyclical policy, and also because they want President Obama to fail. So in a way, Germany and the US are symmetric opposites. The debate is more contested in the US, and the microeconomic welfare social contract is under attack. Debate is less contested in Germany, and it is the macroeconomic countercyclical social contract that is under attack. Okay, if that's our inventory, the next question is which country is doing better in this war of ideas? And here I would like us to think along 3 dimensions. Dimension number 1 is how strong is the opposition we face. Dimension number 2 is has engagement with the war of ideas begun? And then dimension number 3 is how urgent is it that engagement begin? So in the US, I would say that the neoliberal opposition is actually far stronger. And success in the US actually requires much deeper change regarding views about society. The neoliberal free market ideology has taken far deeper root in the public's political imagination, so that it will be harder to turn around. Germany's social and intellectual ethos, I think, remains social democratic. What is needed, and this is really my message today to a German audience, is what is needed is that social democrats rediscover their social democratic heart and belief in the social contract, both microeconomic and macroeconomic. Next question is, has engagement with the war of ideas begun? Well, I would say that actually, strangely, in the US, political engagement has begun, as actually evidenced by the contested nature of our political conversation. And I would say that in Germany, it hasn't, at least as measured by the very modest differences of political style and substance. I would also say there's a lot of complaint about the contested and divided nature of the US political discourse. I'm always hearing it from liberals and so on. I think these complaints are completely misplaced. Contest and division is a good thing, not a bad thing. It is the hallmark of the beginning of change. And when you have a contested politics in Germany, that will be a sign that you are on the road to change. So if anything, the problem in the US, my criticism of the Democrats in the US, is that they have not differentiated themselves enough and have not yet offered policies that are up to the scale of the problem. So then that leads to the question is, how urgent is that engagement begin? Well, in the US, what we see is that growth is subpar, but at least it's positive. We see that employment is increasing, and I don't think there's anything equivalent to the Eurozone crisis. I would argue that Germany is actually in a dangerous situation. It is the largest economy in Europe, and it's significantly oriented to export-led growth. The Eurozone is trapped in stagnation that I think could deepen, and the system could easily disintegrate under country, economic, and political pressures. If that happens, I believe that the economic and political fallout could be very ugly. I think it's therefore absolutely urgent and critical that German social democrats take up engagement with the war of ideas. And what's needed? At the European level, there is need for the reform of the European Central Bank so that it acts as government banker. I think this is the critical question. It must be a government banker. People talk too much of it being a lender of last resort. It already is a lender of last resort. It's been acting as a lender of last resort for 4 years. It must be a government banker that helps countries finance stimulus, fiscal policy, budget deficits. And that must be accompanied by expansionary fiscal and wage coordination across the Eurozone. The other piece of this is that Germany must abandon its export-led growth model based on wage suppression and shift to a domestic demand-led growth model based on rising wages. Now, what's critical here is only Germany can change its own policies, and European policy cannot change without German approval. That means that Germany is absolutely the center of shared prosperity in the Eurozone. And if Germany does not change, the Eurozone does not get to enjoy shared prosperity and full employment. So let me go to my conclusion then. We are engaged in a common war of ideas across the transatlantic space. That is what unifies us today. And the outcome of that war will determine whether or not we have a future of shared prosperity. Neoliberalism is a global ideology, and it has therefore infected both the US and Germany. Our common challenge is to bend the arc of history away from neoliberalism and back towards social democracy with shared prosperity and full employment. It's my belief that the politics of austerity, the attack on social security, the acceptance of income inequality, the neglect of public investment, the denial of global warming, all the things we've talked about today, they all thrive on lack of confidence and assertiveness of social democrats in the merits and viability of social democracy. And my hope is this conference and the conference in Washington together have helped people understand that challenge and have provided some solutions. And above all, I hope that the conferences have helped convince political leaders of the urgency and feasibility of meeting this challenge by asserting the case again for social democracy. Thank you very much.
That leaves me, ladies and gentlemen, to thank you all for being here this whole day, this intensive day, this long day. And in my closing statement, I can only reiterate what Tom has said. We need to wage the war of ideas. And I'm glad that somebody from the US told this German audience, predominantly German audience, that it is necessary. Because if you want to wage a war, you need warriors. And one must admit that it's hard to find these kind of warriors within the Social Democratic Party. But I think it's an absolute necessity that this party changes, that the German politics change. Otherwise, the European landscape will be changed. We see already, not any longer at the fringe, we see in the midst of the political culture in many countries in Europe, divisive movements coming up, most recently in Italy with the election last Sunday. And we see it also in Germany, new parties are being established. 1 or 2 weeks ago, even the parties predominantly led by economists, by German economists, making the neoliberal orthodoxy to a party program, implying, not explicitly, but implicitly, that Germany, the Eurozone should be destroyed, and Germany should be part of a kind of northern Euro area and leave the southerners, which are lazy anyway, outside. All these kind of national resentments are being reiterated by these kinds of parties. This means Europe is falling back behind its achievement, its splendid achievement it has had after World War II. So the task that challenges us is very big. And I think all of us who know that this course, this basic course in economic policy is wrong, have certainly the obligation to try to convince and to communicate to the general audience that this course of policy should be changed. It's a long way to do that in Germany, because things and thinking about the macroeconomic policy is entrenched in a very deep manner, far beyond the conservative reach of political parties. And I think we have to do a lot of work, a lot of convincing here to make that impact that is necessary on economic policy in Germany and all over Europe to achieve a stable Europe again. So this is the end of this conference, but it's not the end of our strive. We have to continue, and I feel it as one of my obligations to continue that cooperation in many flexible and different forms. First, because we have to learn from each other. Secondly, we have to wage the war of ideas together. Thank you very much.